To all my moms moving on, I have something amazing for you. If you're ready to move on from your engagement ring, the experts at Worthy can help you turn it into cash, fast and risk-free. Worthy does all the work, and their competitive auctions get you the best deal possible. Over 45,000 people have already moved on with Worthy. Are you ready to move on too? Visit worthy.com/moms to get an extra $100 when your jewelry sells for over $1,500. That's worthy.com/moms for a special bonus offer just for the Moms Moving On community.
Being a parent and being responsible for a person who's not going to be a child forever, and having to deal with that, and also deal with another person in combination with that, that to me was the hard part. You know, like two people showing up from two vastly different worlds, and then showing up now even more differently because you're a parent. And what does that look like when you're trying to raise a human?
Thank you, everybody, for being here. I am so excited to introduce you to new friend, Joel Leon. He is a performer, author, and storyteller. And he put on a TED Talk recently that floored me, that I've used in so many of my workshops and trainings, that brought me to tears, and that made both me and my assistant decide we got to get this guy on the show. Joel, thank you so much for being here.
Nah, it's my absolute pleasure. Sean, thank you. Thank you for that love. Yeah, this is dope. It's cool for us to sit down and have this convo.
I agree, because co-parenting from a father's perspective, which is, you know, you shined a very bright light on that in your TED Talk, and I'll get to that in a second, but we don't get to often hear so much from what it feels like to be a dad who's come out of a broken marriage, who's just trying his best to co-parent against, you know, how hurt and angry his former spouse might be, or former partner. But before we go into all that, I want to say that I don't know, because you're a creator and you're a writer, and I'm also in that space, I don't know if when you're creating the work, you realize the impact it's going to have. You know, like sometimes people will reach out to me and they'll say, oh my God, that episode or that article, you changed my life. Your TED Talk was one of those for so many people. And I wonder if like you even know that, because you need to know that.
First, I mean, again, Michelle, thank you so much. You know, and just for those who listening, that is West, my 2-year-old in the background. Why are you yelling? Stop. Thank you. Thank you. It's also our dog in the background. You know, I'm not really, I try not to get too hyped about like numbers, you know. So I say that by, like, I wanted to preface this by also saying, like, the TED Talk now currently is at about I think like 1.6 million views. And so like if we're thinking about it from a metrics point of view, like I can physically see the impact. But I think it's interesting. And I say that because I think there's a tendency for people to think that the TED Talk had a lot more traction for me than it actually did. Like, hearing you say that means so much to me, because I didn't get a lot of actual responses, if I'm being fair. And I think partially is because I didn't want to become a dad influencer. You feel me? Like, right. I wasn't doing the thing in order to be like, okay, well now this is, and like, not a knock on anybody, but this wasn't a thing that I did to then say, okay, I'm going to make this my brand, if you will. Like, and so now I'm going to be on every single dad show or every single parenting show talking about it. The TED team reached out to me. And granted, I'd been wanting to give a TED Talk, and the TED Talk I wanted to give was about art. Like, I wanted to talk about art, like Black man coming from the hood, talking about like how arts and the performing arts specifically like shifted, changed my life, whatever. And Helen Waters, beautiful human being, one of the head editors on the TED team, she actually messaged me on Twitter the day my partner Bria and I were coming from an ultrasound for my second child, West, and her first child. And I went into my Twitter mentions and it was like, hey, Joelle, this is Helen from TED. Would love to see you be open to giving a TED Talk. Like, that was what the message said. It was like, I started dancing. It was what I was
right,
wild.
Of course. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But they reached out to me because they wanted me to give a talk about fatherhood, because I've been, specifically Black fatherhood, because I've been writing about fatherhood for some time. Lila now is 7. and I was doing a lot of writing, not necessarily about co-parenting, but about my fears, my confusion, all the things that I think parents think about when it comes to like having their first child. And so I was writing deliberately and intentionally about that. But when they reached out to me, I was like, I don't want to talk about Black fatherhood. I think because for those who are not aware, single Black fathers make up a large percentile of the fathers who are actually showing up actively for their children.
Mm-hmm.
Data proves it. And so like I didn't want to have a conversation about something that I knew was the truth. What I did want to have a conversation about was something that I felt like I wasn't hearing enough about, and it was co-parenting after a separation. And not like a divorce, but like a separation. This person and I met each other, we liked each other, we dated, and then all of a sudden we had a child.
Right.
Like that was the thing. And so
Right.
having that be a part of it, it was like, okay, I want to have a conversation that illuminates that for me and also gives me guidance. Because I was looking
Yeah.
for conversations about it. I was looking for blogs about it. There was like one blog I'd found from some dude who was based out in Canada who had been writing about co-parenting long distance. And even that, it didn't feel nuanced enough. And like, I needed nuance. I live in nuance. Like I like everything has context. And so the talk for me was my opportunity to like hopefully give somebody else the space to see like, oh, this is possible. It's hard, incredibly
Well, the
difficult,
title was perfect. It's
Yeah.
for those of you who don't know, it's called The Beautiful Hard Work of Co-Parenting. And me, I'm as a woman, as a mom, I'm talking about it all day long, but you don't what I always ask my clients to do in my community to do is take a step back and put themselves in their ex-spouse's shoes. If they're in a hetero relationship and it's a male who they're divorcing or separating from, how might that feel for dad to now be like sort of ousted because the children are young and mom always did 99% of the feeding or the nurturing. And now there's this idea of like, not only, do the parents have to separate, but dad's ego is threatened a little bit by like, well, I'm just going to take care of the kids and you can see them, when I say it's okay. And so I always ask people to take a step back and look at it from that perspective, because when we don't give people a chance, they can't rise to the occasion. And I want to hear, I'm going to stop talking because your voice is so soothing and I want people to hear your background and your philosophy on co-parenting, I guess.
Well, I mean, and thank you for sharing what you shared, Michelle, because I think that it's important. I feel like empathy and compassion have been two of the biggest motivators for me anyway, with like the work I do with the art that I make. And I think, something I had read from my good friend Sharon Salzberg, phenomenal mindfulness practitioner. She had interviewed someone, a Buddhist practitioner, who was sharing. They were sharing their thoughts on empathy and compassion, and what they said was compassion is empathy in action, right? And like that was a really like a gear shift for me, because then it meant it's not just enough to feel and like really be able to mirror an experience and say, oh, like I understand that, but what are the tangible actions I'm taking in order to move that forward? And so co-parenting for me was an exercise in that. I'm gonna be 40 in January, and so there's just been a lot of sitting with what legacy looks like. And I feel like as men, especially as Black men, there's a lot of conversations about legacy, which is why, there's those conversations about like, I want to make sure I have boys, or like some of, I think, the more outdated ideas, but like legacy for me is like, what am I leaving behind for my children? And also too, just as importantly, what am I leaving behind for my community? And so my art practice is very much centered around community. And it's, whether it's me doing a spoken word piece, whether it's me writing an essay, whether it's me writing a song, whether it's me rapping on stage, acting, art for me, it has been medicinal, and art is also, I think, a catalyst for change and for growth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've treated even co-parenting, I think parenting is a very creative process. And especially if you're a stay-at-home parent,
Yeah.
especially if you're a stay-at-home mom. And I think when I say that to say, like, when I think about Kimberly Crenshaw and I think about intersectionality, what we're talking about is not just, oh, I am a woman, but I am a white woman or a Black woman who grew up this way, and this is the city I live in. Like, there's so many intersections that affect the chosen direction we lean into as parents. And I think we
Mm-hmm.
need to I say all that to go back to your original point of like giving people a chance. I think if we're not looking at the context of which a person was reared and like how that trauma and like their projections affect how they show up in the world, we're missing an opportunity for growth.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes. And this is, and you talk about empathy. My whole thing is, you know, empathy, not sympathy, right? Like we can not pity somebody, but we can feel for them and what they've experienced and understand life through their lens so that we can co-parent. So, you know, you have to do it in a marriage anyway. We're all coming from different places and different experiences. And so I think there's a really evolved set of people who understand co-parenting from that perspective, and you're one of them. And I love that about you.
And I think, and again, Michelle, thank you. And I think too, I mean, I think what bothers me the most too is like I'll have conversations with folks because even now, Bria and I, who's my now partner, we co-parent. Like co-parenting is not just relegated to like, oh, we're divorced or we're separated. Like Bria has days where she's not with the kids as she should. Like a lot of what I've tried to stress to my parenting friends, and some might disagree with this. I am very much of the mind, if you're healthy, like mentally, spiritually, physically healthy, meaning like you are doing things that are aligned with your values, with your purpose, whatever the case might be, that you should be putting yourself first. Because when you're doing that, you're allowing your children the opportunity to see a holistic point of view of how you're showing up in the world. So like, you know, early on, I used to bring Lila to my shows. You know, she loved being there. And also too, I wanted her to see her father in environments that were not just me being a parent. So like, even when Lila and I are having conversations, and Lila's 7 now, we're having conversations about a multitude of things that probably might make some people uncomfortable. But part of that is also recognizing that I value the time that I have with her alone. You know, so like we'll go on daddy-daughter dates, you know what I'm saying? Like,
so cute.
and like, and part of that is because I want her to have a relationship with me that's independent of like her just feeling like I'm a parent. Like, how are we showing up for each other? But then also there are times like when I go out and like Bria's with the girls because it's my time.
Right.
You know, like,
yeah.
And that's all we're saying as co-parents. And I think that world needs to and should exist, whether you're together, whether you're separated, whatever the case might be.
I love that. Is Lila the daughter that you wrote the book for?
Yes.
Yes. Joelle is also an author of 2 books, one of them called A Book About Things I Will Tell My Daughter. And, you know, I'm a softie for the daddy-daughter relationship because I didn't have that. My ex-husband, my daughter's father, has an amazing relationship with our daughter that like brings me to tears because I'm so grateful for that. And I think we're starting to see now in this generation that relationship is so critically important, you know, whereas for my parents' generation, when my parents got divorced, it was like, oh, well, daddy's gone. It's fine. You'll be fine. And now we're all trying to clean up the mess of that mentality, all of us girls with daddy issues. And so it's so important that men show up for their daughters. And I love when I'm able to make that connection with another mom who, you know, her pain and anger is taking center stage, and she's so focused on what dad did to ruin the marriage and losing sight of that connection that needs to be established between dad and daughter for long-term success for everybody.
Yeah. And you know, and like I think about the Buddhist practice of non-attachment a lot, and which is very different than detachment, right? Like not void of feeling or practicing avoidance of feelings, but recognizing that I can see a thing for what it is. I don't have to cling to a certain outcome in order for things to feel right, quote unquote, you know, like, because I don't, you know, and so part of that is, you know, I don't say this, and this again might, you know, people can take it how they take it, but I would be heartbroken if Bria and I didn't last. You know, I would also I would pick up the pieces because I have no choice, and not because I don't have a choice because I have to live for other people, but you know, like I've tried to really root myself and ground myself in the idea that I am a fully functioning human being who thrives in community, but is not dependent on any single one person to be the end all be all for my happiness. And so, you know, we can look at things.
Yeah, it's the greatest lesson you'll ever learn in life.
Yeah. You know, like we can look at, you know, like we can look at a situation like the wonderful human being Tia Mowry. And like Tia is being, like there's so many people who are celebrating the decision you make. Then there's so many other folks who are trying to drag her through the mud for making a decision that I personally know and believe was best for her and best for her children. And not necessarily seeing divorce or separation as a failure, you know, because I think people see the word success and they're like, well, marriage, if it didn't last, then it wasn't successful. And I'm like, by whose metric? You know, and
Exactly. Thank you.
you know, by whose metric? And so I think that the way that you frame that, I think, is really important.
So tell me, for you, what is the beautiful hard work of co-parenting?
Um, you know, that it's two different people who come from two very different backgrounds, who have sometimes have similar beliefs and sometimes do not when it comes to raising a child, another whole human being who has their own set of ideas, values, beliefs. You know, I think a lot about child psychologists who talk about two different parents, right? Like you have a carpenter, you have a gardener, right? And the carpenter is very much the person that feels like, I'm going to carve this path out for you. You're going to be a doctor. You're going to be a lawyer. You see this a lot in like Caribbean households. I think you see this a lot, and also I think like really strong ethnic households, like
Yes.
whether you're Jewish, Italian, right? It's like if you're not doing this thing, you're not successful.
Right. Very black and white.
Right, you know, and like
Yeah.
a gardener, which is what I tend to think I am. A gardener is a parent who decides who creates a space for their child to figure this out on their own. Like I'm creating the space, but I can't dictate where you go, but I'm going to give you the room to figure that out. And not everyone shows up in that way as a parent, you know, because again, we're bringing all of our other. Can we curse on this? Is cursing
Yeah, of
okay?
course.
Oh, yeah. We're bringing all our other shit into the mix. You feel me? So it's like all your trauma, like your daddy issues, your mommy issues, your
Yes.
past relationships, your past regrets, the things, and like part of the reason why I wrote the book was I didn't want, and part of the reason, the big reason why I started writing essays, because I was very much focused on music at the time. But when I found out I was going to be a dad, music didn't feel like it was giving me the room that I needed to speak through the things I was processing.
Yeah.
And so I
It's
started
so
writing.
much deeper than you could ever like put
Michelle, like
into 2.5
yeah,
minutes. Yeah.
yeah, you know what I'm saying, with like a catchy hook, and like that
Yeah.
wasn't gonna do it. So I started writing essays, and so part of for me the it was cathartic because I didn't want to pass any of my demons on to my child, and so I felt like I had to put those on paper. You know, like that was my process and my thinking. But you know, not everyone has the access to the tools or the language, and so you show up as two new people because parenting changes you, right? I always say like
Mm-hmm.
parenting to me, there are very few things that you can't say, oh, I understand unless you're doing it. Like,
Right.
I don't care how many cousins and siblings you raised on your
How
own
many
in your big
pets you
house.
have? Yeah.
Yeah, like being a parent and being responsible for a person who's not going to be a child forever and having to deal with that and also deal with another person in combination with that. That to me was the hard part, you know, like two people showing up from two vastly different worlds and then showing up now even more differently because you're a parent. And what does that
Yeah.
look like when you're trying to raise a human together when you're not connected, like
Yes.
in that way, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what people find out later on though, once they get separated and they get past all the emotion. It's like, oh, we're still parenting together. We just don't have that love piece involved, or maybe we do and it just looks a lot different. But it takes a lot of time and support and healing to get to that place where you kind of come full circle, where you're like, okay, we're parents and we're on the same journey, just not in the same house, or just not, in the same bed, whatever it's going to look like. And that to me, I think is like the epiphany of co-parenting. Like I say there's the fuckery of co-parenting, which is, oh, I got to give my kid to this person I no longer like, trust, or love. And I just got to be like, okay, you do you. Good luck. I'm going to go to bed now. Like, that's the fuckery of co-parenting. But the beauty is when it comes full circle and you're like, yeah, you know what? It's water under the bridge. We love our kid. Let's figure it all out.
Yeah, and I love that sentiment, Michelle, because I think part of it too is, and again, not to bring up Buddhism again, because I don't want folks feeling
I
like
love
this is
it.
like us, but but like, you know, there's a difference between like pain and suffering, right? Pain is a condition that we're going to have to go through. I don't care how much a person loves you, they're going to hurt you in some way, shape, or form, and not intentionally. I think
I know
it's
what
just,
you're going to say, and I believe in it so much. But
you know what
yes,
I'm saying? But like
yeah,
the suffering comes from when we
hmm,
cling to outcomes. Like
yeah,
if you're like, oh man, I wanted this marriage to work. It did. Let's just say it did for argument's sake. what does it look like to move away from this idea of what no longer is and moving into what is present day? Like, we are no longer together. And I'm a Capricorn, so like which sometimes makes people feel uncomfortable, but like my logic brain goes, okay, this thing is done. What is the next step? Like, I'm working. So I'm
Yeah.
trying to figure out how to make this puzzle piece work. And I think,
Well,
you
we
know,
don't choose our pain, but we do choose our suffering,
yeah,
right?
yes, absolutely, absolutely. It's a choice, unless of course you're suffering from some sort of chemical disorder that's not allowing you to make that kind of
No,
decision.
I
But
mean in the sense of
you know,
heartbreak. Like,
absolutely, there's a
I
distinction.
I think there is a big distinction, and I, in my practice I call that being the victim or the victor, and you can sit around and say, well, yeah, my life sucks. My husband cheated on me, left me for somebody younger. This is such bullshit. I have to watch somebody else live my life. Or he left. He made me so unhappy, and I can own that. And now I can create my own life, and him and his little girl can go do whatever they want, because I'm going to become the best version of me. And that's the difference between pain and suffering, victim and victor, mindset, all of that. It's a choice. I think it's really a choice.
No, you're absolutely correct, and I think in a and for like a situation like you're talking to, really what it boils down to is like someone, like, we want people who are choosing us. Like,
Yeah.
you deserve a person who's choosing you. Like, I choose to show up as a parent every single day. Like, there's like, and there are days when I don't have it, and that is absolutely okay. It's normal. It happens to the best of us. But I think when we're so focused on the thing that we've lost, we're missing out on an opportunity to look and see the things we've actually gained. And I don't even consider that to be like an optimistic point of view. I think I'm very realist and pragmatic in that way. But I think it's like, you've lost a thing. You've also created space for something newer, something better, something bigger, something bolder, no matter how old you are. Because I think age also plays a big factor, and especially, of course, if you're a woman, because the way society and media is kind of
Yeah.
talked to separation and what it looks like for a woman who's quote unquote older, right? Whatever
Right.
that means. Like, it's different. It's like there's a lot of things that we're having to weigh in that conversation, but there's so much more to gain from being able to say, I'm choosing myself. If no one else is choosing me, I'm choosing myself in this scenario.
Oh, I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. And I think the lesson that gives to your children, this whole mindset of divorce or, living in two separate homes is terrible for the kids. But no one taught me as a kid to choose myself. I took the example from my mom choosing not to stay with somebody who treated her horribly. And I, without that, what would I have learned? I think that was when it came time for me to get divorced, my whole mindset was, my mom did this. She did it so well. She chose herself, and I can do that too. It was one of those situations where she could have stayed, but she would have been very unhappy. And so she chose not to. And I followed that same path.
And I love that you got that example, because I think so many of us, like, this is why I don't really look at, like, people will kind of put front and center, like, like, my parents were together for 50, 60 years, and
Yeah.
some might say this might be jaded, and I don't think it is. But the first question I ask myself, because I don't ask people this because I think it's rude, but the first question I generally ask myself when I hear people have stayed together that long, like, what has the mom had to sacrifice in order to keep this going, right?
Yeah.
Like, especially if
Yeah.
we're looking at older couples, because again, I'm looking at the context of, like, we're talking about not being able to have a bank account until until like the early 1970s. Like, we're talking a very different time
Very
period. So,
different
like,
time.
things even now look different, I think, even when we're talking about dating for men and women, because women have options. It's like, oh, I can choose not to stay in a thing that I'm unhappy about, where I think a lot of folks, happiness wasn't a thing that they felt they needed to make a decision about.
Right.
Like, you stayed at the job that you hated because you were supposed to do it. You stayed
Right.
married because you're supposed to do it. And no one was giving you the room to ask, well, why? And I think people are asking why.
Right. Right. And I think, the more we move towards this space where we're open about choosing our happiness and choosing our pain and suffering, we are going to find a lot more people splitting up. But bringing it full circle, that doesn't necessarily mean the end of the world for your children. It can mean the beginning of a beautiful new one if you do it right. So what are the benefits that you've seen in your own experience from living this shared parenting lifestyle?
I mean, I feel like I probably would have leaned into this, but I think it's made it more easier for me to have independent relationships with my children that are not centered around both parents, and like having to really figure out how to carve out space. Like that happened from jump. Lila's mother and I were not together while she was pregnant. This wasn't like a thing that happened when Lila was 2 or 3. We made that decision in the first trimester, and it was incredibly difficult. Those 3 years were some of the most difficult years of my life. But
Yeah.
I can look back on that now and go, Lila's back here in New York. She was in Houston for 2 years. There were a lot, like when I gave that talk, it was with knowing that Lila was going to be moving to Houston in a month, and like I was shattered. Like there was just and then like West, my second child, was born 2 weeks after Lila left. And so like there was some postpartum. There was a whole lot of other stuff that I had to process. But I think when I look back at it now, co-parenting has allowed, I think, even not just for me, but for Lila, there's a sense of like there are multiple, what I've been telling her, there are more places for you to call home,
Oh, I love
and
that.
there are like, you just have an abundance of community who loves you because we've opened up the conversation and opened up community for her by this practice, right? And so like it was hard for a while saying bye to her when I would go to Houston, but it also created like a longing, and it also, I think, deepened our friendship, because I do consider my child my friend. I'm very much a parent, and I don't like the word disciplinarian, but I am her guardian and shepherd, and so like my job is to like create boundaries and protect her, and also like that's my homie, so like we kick it. So
I love that.
so like that, this has allowed me a better, deeper understanding. And I think, if I'm being honest, for her mom, it's also created something different and unique, because it's given her a real chance to like miss Lila in a way that she hasn't had to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And also, like, I think, look at different parts of their relationship that weren't really getting explored, because she was the physical custodian. Even though I was taking care of Lila, like very much so, she was staying with her. And
Right.
so we're in a world where that's not the case. And so, I've had to make room for her, because there's also this notion that, oh, you're the mom, your child is supposed to be with you. And, what I want us to be able to do is really have healthier conversations, healthy, right? And not just like money conversations, because the money doesn't fix everything. But where's a child thriving? Where does a child feel safest?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then and us having a really heart to heart conversation about what that looks like. But for
Yeah.
me, it's been such a learning experience, which I think is probably what I've valued most from all of it.
I think what you said at the beginning of this piece was the independent relationship. Like I always say I'm 150% parenting 50% of the time. That intentionality, that knowing that I only have this period of time, or I only have this weekend before she goes back to her dad's, or these 2 days or these 3 nights, it has made that time that I have with my daughter so much more intentional. And not that non-divorced people are taking their kids for granted, but I definitely don't take her for granted in a way that I don't see in married dynamics, because your kids are always around, right? And our independent relationship, free of another person in the house taking attention or whatever it is, that for me, I couldn't be more grateful for it.
Yeah, and it's and to your point, I think, it's like when people say, live every day like it's your last, which is impossible. And not to say that we shouldn't try or attempt to do it, but even if you are the parent who's like, I'm smothering my children, or like, there is something about not being with your child that shifts how you show up for them. And
Mm-hmm.
it's different. And I think it does highlight some things. It's like anything that you're away from. And I think we tend to like convolute these conversations, because it's like, well, I don't do that. And it's like, well, you can be an exceptional parent, and at the same time recognize, like, if I take a vacation from my job, and I use vacation loosely because I don't think this is necessarily a vacation from parenting, but if I'm away from my job for a week or a weekend or whatever, like, you come in with a different mindset and frame
You
of
do.
mind. Like, it's not any different per se in that regard. And so it shifts something in you. So like there's definitely more of a value, I think, that I'm I'm very much aware of, I think, in ways that I probably wasn't before.
Yeah, the self-awareness is huge. And I'm grateful for it because I needed it in so many ways. And, you know, it's all a journey and I trust it. And I believe like the process I've been put through was necessary to get me to the place that I'm at. And I'm sure you feel the same way. You seem very spiritual. But I think this is a good place to end. What do you wish more dads knew, co-parenting dads knew about the process?
Really good question. That your love and support of your child is independent of your love for or lack of love for the person that you're parenting with. Like there was a point in time when Lala's mom hated me, and I'm pretty sure I hated her. like we said things to each other.
That only comes after like passion gone wrong. So I get it.
Yeah, like it just was not working at all. But like the North Star has always been Lila. There was nothing I would not do for that child. And so
right.
I can get over the hardships, I can get over the arguments, I can get over like all the things that we were struggling with, because it's like this is what the focus is. And so often where we cannot remove ourselves from, like you mentioned this earlier, Michelle, like, they left me for this attractive woman, or she left me for the dude that had a better job, or whatever. And it's like, I don't give a fuck. Like, that has nothing to do with how I'm parenting this person who A, didn't ask to be here, and B, does not really care, especially if, like, depending on how old they are, care less about the money or the trips. They just want to spend time with the person that they've known to be their guardian. Like, that's it. And so, like, I think for a lot of the men who are hopefully listening, it's like all the other stuff is inconsequential. And I get how difficult it can be. I can get how, even like, and for mothers too, who might be going through this, who are a similar issue, where it's like the priority is the child. And I know sometimes people say it, but they don't actually believe it, or they're not owning it.
They don't practice what they preach, right?
No, because like you do things, like you do spiteful things, or you'll say things around the child that has nothing, that the child does not need to know, like bad mouthing, like you can't be bad mouthing a parent, because like, again, the child, this has nothing to do with the child. Your issues, your trauma, your problems, that gets put on the back burner. You can process that shit in therapy.
Yes, you can, and you should.
Yes, please. But the primary concern is the child, always.
Yes, always. Well, I love that. Your love for your child can be independent from your relationship with their other parent. That's probably the most poignant quote on co-parenting there is, but I'm not surprised that you figured it out, because you just have a way with words, Joel. You are a beautiful human. Your children are so lucky to have you, and I'm so grateful for the contributions you've made to this space. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you?
Cool. I am on Instagram. I am Joel, Joel Leon. I'm also on Twitter. Unfortunately, not the same handle, but Joel, aka MAG. All that stuff is in my, like, if you go to my Instagram,
I'm gonna link it all, so don't worry.
Yeah. The books are there, the music is there, all the other stuff, like the shows I've done, all that's it's in the Instagram bio link. So yeah.
Well, we really appreciate you, and I'm so excited to see what you bring to this world next. For everybody listening, thank you so much for being here. And we'll see you next time on Moms Moving On.